following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back when the Jints and Dem Bums played in New York. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and I've got the two mavens on the subject with me today, Mr. Noel Hynd and Mr. Alan Blumkin. Start with you, Noel. How are you, sir?
Well, if you want an honest answer, I've got a sore throat, but I'm sort of muddling through it. But I had one yesterday when we spoke also, so I guess I'll survive. Aside from that, I'm fine.
Okay. And, Alan, I understand that you're back ill.
Yeah. All I got now is the arthritic knee. It changes with the weather here, which is a lot. We have a beautiful day today, and tomorrow it's going to rain.
It certainly will change.
Yeah.
We're coming to you from three parts of the country. I'm in Northern California, Noel's in Southern California, and Alan is in Brooklyn. So, guys, started off with catchers. We're going to talk about the catchers of the day. Start with you, Alan Blumkin. Have a wonderful show, guys.
Okay. Well, my favorite catcher player of all time, who was a terrific player, which a lot of people forget because of his reputation for his quotes, is Yogi Berra.
Ah, right, sure.
Yeah. And Yogi came up in 1946. He served as in World War II in the Navy, and he was on the boats that led the forces into France on D-Day.
Right.
Right. And
with typical Yogi,
yeah.
He survived it also.
Yeah. And he came out, spent time in Newark in 1946, was brought up at the end of the season. Was there in 1947 when they won everything, but he basically was an outfielder. When Casey Stengel took over the Yankees in 1949, he hired Bill Dickey to be a coach and work with Yogi on his catching. Apparently, he did a pretty good job because Yogi, he said that Bill Dickey learned him all his experience.
Yes, exactly.
And so Yogi, from 1950 through 1956, hardly missed a game, and he was in the top 4 of the MVP voting for 7 straight years, winning 3 times in 51, 54, and 55. He knew how to handle pitchers, and the big three who were very skeptical, Reggie, Reynolds, and Wopat, were skeptical about him, learned to trust him. And there's an incident with Vic Raschi where Raschi was on the mound, and Stengel, pointed to Yogi to go out and talk to him. Yogi gets about halfway out there, and Raschi says, Raschi was very, very tough competitor. He says, "Now another step further." So Yogi's there for about 2 minutes. Finally goes out to the mound. Raschi tells him, "I told you not to come out here." So, and Yogi said, in his inimitable way, your number ain't 37, which was Casey Stengel's number. And,
yeah.
But they learned to trust him, and Yogi became a favorite of Casey Stengel, who we referred to him as my assistant manager.
Well, Stengel didn't like him at first. Am I correct on that?
Well, he saw the talent.
Okay.
Okay, and he got Dickey in there, and one of the things that happened in either 48 or 49 was that they were playing a doubleheader in Washington. And it was very, very hot. And Yogi begged out of playing the second game. And the Yankees lost by a run, and he goes in there, into the clubhouse happy. And Joe DiMaggio, sitting there, totally spent, looks at Berra and said, "You're 24 years old or 23 years old, and you can't catch both ends of a doubleheader." And Yogi hardly missed the game after that. Yeah.
That one word from DiMaggio would often make a big difference to anyone. Yeah.
Yeah, and Yogi eventually played in 14 World Series, on 10 of which they won. And he became, he had the sweetest swing. I mean, every time I see an old film of his swinging, he batted left-handed, and hitting the ball fair. He swung at bad balls, and Derek Jeter went through a time when he was swinging at bad balls. And he goes to Yogi and says, "How did you swing at them?" He says, "I swung at anything I saw. I could hit them," which Jeter couldn't. But Yogi became a national icon. He was very popular. He managed the Yankees in 1964. Was fired after winning the pennant, and then he went to the Mets, where he managed them in 1973 to a National League championship. Came back to the Yankees after 1975, and they made him manager again in 1984, and Steinbrenner fired him after 16 games in 1985, and Yogi refused to go to the stadium after that because he didn't like the way it was handled. And when DiMaggio died in early 1999, Yogi Berra became the leading living Yankee icon, and Susan Wolven, the announcer, brokered it, and Steinbrenner went out to Yogi's museum and got his hands and knees and asked Yogi to come back. So Yogi was very hesitant, and his wife Carmen and a couple of his sons, urged him to go, and he went there. The date of his return was July 18th, 1999. I had to go up there. I went up with 3 friends. I had to be there for that. And that was the day David Cone pitched his perfect game against the Expos. And ironically, Don Larson was there. And he threw the first pitch of the game to Yogi, catching. And both of them were there to see another perfect game, which was incredible. But Yogi became a tremendous catcher. He was very feared as a clutch hitter. Mm-hmm. And he manifested this in the 7th game of the 1956 World Series, where he had two-run home runs off Don Newcomb. Gave the Yankees a 4-0 lead, and they went out to win the 7th game 9-0.
Yeah.
And he
didn't somebody hit a grand slam in that game?
Skowron.
That's right. Yeah. And
that was 5-0 at the time. Yeah, he just that Berra hit a grand slam off Newcomb in Game 2, which the Yankees blew a 6-run lead and lost 13-8. So he hit 3 home runs and drove in 8 runs off Newcomb. And that series.
The last game was at Ebbets Field, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. And he should have been the MVP because Lawson, despite the perfect game, got pummeled very hard in the second game. But Yogi started decline. He started declining as probably from the wear and tear of catching all those years. In 1957. And Stengel started to use Yogi less as a catcher and more as an outfielder. Meanwhile, Elston Howard had transitioned the other way from the outfield to catching. And one of the more famous pictures of Yogi is him watching Bill Mazeroski's home run in Game 7 of the 1960 World Series go over the wall because Yogi was playing left field at the time. But he was a great player, and probably along with Casey Stengel and Satchel Paige was one of the three greatest contributors of quotes from that era.
Yeah, you'd probably want to tack DeRocher on there too, because he had a couple of good ones, most of which can't be repeated on regular broadcast radio. But Berra was absolutely terrific. I can remember seeing, and everybody liked him. Nobody disliked him.
I've had a bad word to say about him. Yeah.
No, I've never in my life heard anything anybody said critically about Yogi is usually followed up with a qualification. Like I've heard people say, well, he wasn't the brightest guy, but he had great baseball sense. But I'd say he was brighter than people gave him credit for. But the malapropism and the lack of articulation made him sound dumb sometimes, and yet if you really looked at what he said, it was usually right. For example, the quote that you came up with earlier, that Dickie learned him his experience. Well, yeah, I mean, we know what he meant. So, a lot of his stuff was really spot on. It was just expressed strangely.
Yeah, he said that he didn't say funny things. He said things funny. And I years ago, I was at a friend of mine in Springfield, Mass., and I was driving to see another friend of mine in Rocky Hill, Connecticut. So I remember that, and I couldn't call my friend in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, because the phones were out there then for a few days. And so I followed Yogi's advice. I wound up in the shopping center, which I had seen before. And Yogi said, when you get to the fork in the road, take it. And then I didn't know which way when I got out of the shopping center, and I went the wrong way. And I said, Yogi said, if it's the wrong way, try the other way, or something along those lines. So I did that, and I found them.
There you go. Why do you think that managing really didn't work out that well for him? Why do you think that might have been?
Because
I know. Go ahead.
He was too close to the players, and he didn't have a really fiery temperament. The only times I ever saw him get crazy was, or read about it, was the Jackie Robinson play in the first game of '55. Yogi, and later, because some people have posted this, would sign a picture of the play, and Yogi would say Yogi Berra, and underneath it he was out with an exclamation point. And he insisted to his dying day that Robinson was out. And there was a story that he was at some affair with Carmen, and Rachel Robinson was there, and Rachel asked Carmen if she could have a dance with Yogi. So Carmen said yes, and called Yogi over and says, whatever you do, don't bring up that play.
Yeah, it was in Yankee history and folklore. It was a little bit like the play in the World Series where Eddie Stanky kicked the ball out of Phil Rizzuto's hand. They would get mad at it 30, 40 years later and insist that, what they were doing was right. Stanky should have been out. Frankly, I think Yogi had more of an argument than.
I was at a card show. I was at a card show in 1987 at the airport. One of the guests was Johnny Blanchard. And he was the catcher in the late innings of Game 7. He caught the whole Game 7 because Berra was in the outfield in 1960 World Series. And Blanchard was behind the plate all game, and it was about a half hour before the card show. He was talking to people. So I asked him about that inning, and I brought the name Coates. And he turned red as a beet. This is 27 years after that series, and he still was furious about it. But another Yogi thing that he did, which Carmen, who was at the meeting that we had at the museum, she said that he once sent her an anniversary card and said, "Your husband," he puts the signs of Yogi Berra.
Okay.
Yeah, because she didn't know who he was. Yeah, we signed his last name too. He was married to her for 25 years or whatever, and signed his last name to the card. Yeah. And the other time he got really, really mad was when the Phil Lynn's harmonica incident in 1964, where it just been swept by the White Sox in 4 games. And Phil Lynn's was in the back of the bus. Yogi was in the front playing a harmonica. And Yogi yelled out to cut that out. Lynn's didn't hear him, and it's Mickey Mantle what he said. And Mantle, of course, said, "Play it louder."
Yeah.
So I asked Dale Berra, who was at the first meeting we had there, whether Yogi ever got as mad, to his family as he did on the play in Robinson, and he said only when we talked back to our mother. But what's a very interesting book is in April, Dale Berra out with a book called My Father Yogi Berra. And Yogi and Larry Jr., who was older than Dale, almost read him out of the family when he was doing cocaine.
Yeah, I remember that.
And he cleaned himself out. He's been clean for about 20 years now. So it was accepted in as a family. But you're right. Nobody ever said anything bad about Yogi. But he was too close. As a manager, he was too close to the players and probably not tough enough when things went wrong.
Do you think that was the case when he was managing the Mets also?
Well, I don't think he had the talent there. I mean, in 1973, they went to the World Series playing 3 games over 500.
Yeah, 73 and 69, something like that.
The 69 was the coach. Yeah, there's 82 and 79 that year.
That was it. Yeah.
Yeah, in 74 they were awful. Seaver had back problems and won 11 games, and they didn't hit. And finally, in 75, you can't get rid of the whole team, so you get rid of the manager.
Yeah, I can remember a couple of times when I'm trying to be fair about this. It certainly appeared that he left pitchers in, including young pitchers, far too long. I remember a game with a young Met pitcher named Randy Tate. You remember?
Yeah, I remember the name. Yeah.
And Randy Tate was working on either a really sharp shutout or a no-hitter, but he'd thrown a lot of pitches, and Yogi left him in, and I don't even know who the opposition was. It was a good team like St. Louis or Pittsburgh, and Tate gives up a hit, and then he gives up another hit, and Yogi leaves him in for, like, it seems to me in memory, about 3 to 5 batters or something. And it basically, you know how so much of it is a head game, pitching, particularly in baseball?
Yeah.
I don't think Tate ever pitched another good game.
He's famous for going 0 for 41 as a hitter over his career. That's what he's remembered for, yeah.
You work all your life and try to get to the major leagues, and then you're remembered for being 1 in 27 or 0 for 41 or something like that.
Yeah. Also, Barrett, when he was managing the Yankees in 1964, they had a reliever named Pete Mickelson.
Yeah.
Who Yogi, for some reason, which nobody could fathom, was in love with. And he would blow save after save after save after save. And then in Game 5 of the World Series against the Cardinals that year, he brought him into the 5th game in the 10th inning. and everybody was screaming and yelling, and Mickelson gave up a 3-run home run to McCarver that wound up losing the game, and they wound up losing the World Series in 7 games to them. So when the Yankees...
Go ahead.
Okay, also one thing, when when Topping and Webb sold out that year to CBS, and when an ownership decides to... I feel when an ownership decides to sell, that the first thing that goes is player development. So in 1965 with Johnny Keane, I don't think anybody could help the team turn into a shell of what it was. The stars that they had were getting really old, and there's nobody in the farm system to replace them.
Mm-hmm.
But they should not have fired him after 1964. It was a tremendously bad public relations move.
Yeah, it was terrible. And the Yankees in that era were masters of bad public relations moves. I think getting rid of Mel Allen and Red Barber were bad public relations moves. It always seemed, the phrase that always came to mind was heartless. And the Yankee front office always seemed heartless. You know, it was clumsy the way they retired Phil Rizzuto. It was clumsy the way they got rid of Casey. It was clumsy the way they got rid of Yogi. It just went on and on and on. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, because George Weiss, who was the general manager for most of that time, who also left after 1960, George Weiss, years and years ago, I did a segment of a TV program, and I discussed George Weiss. And the comment I wanted to make, that he would have been a great commander of a Nazi death camp.
Yeah.
Because he was like ice. And Berra always held out if he didn't think he was getting paid what he was worth. And Stengel will always fight for Berra to get raises. And but Weiss set a tone there, and he left after 1960, and they had this guy, Roy Hamey, that was in there for 3 years. They got rid of him, and they promoted Houck. When they fired Berra, they promoted Houck. The year before, they promoted Houck from manager to general manager, and that was a disaster.
Yeah. Roy Hamey... go ahead.
Do you want to do Roy Campanella?
I'm going to talk a little bit about Wes Restrom, and then I'll seg it back to Roy Campanella.
Okay, yeah, all right, yeah.
But what I can remember, the catching on the New York Giants was pretty constant for years. Wes Restrom came up, I believe, in the late 40s, and he was there behind the plate just about the entire time through 1957. He was a great catcher defensively. He didn't hit the way Campanella did. He didn't hit the way Howard did. But he always called a good game. And it was not the easiest thing. He had a kind of as I think back on it, a tough pitching staff to handle. You had Magley for a while. You had Antonelli later on. You had to catch Hoyt Wilhelm's knuckleball for a number of years. And Westrom was always in there, always a game competitor. And to circle it around, though, I always got the idea, and this will bring us back to Campy, because we spent a lot of time on Yogi, but I always got the idea that one of the big differences between the Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Yankees in the mid-50s was the Yankees and the Dodgers had huge run production from the catching position, and the New York Giants didn't. If you flip things around, and if Yogi had been with the Giants, or if Campanella had been with the Giants, those standings at the end of each year would have been very, very different. Would you buy that one from me?
Yes. The big thing about Westrom's offense was that he walked a lot.
Right.
And usually he was batting eighth, so the walk would send the pitcher up and clear the pitcher from leading off the next inning. So he's very valuable in that sense. There's a book called that I have called The Miracle on Coogan's Bluff. It's a guy named Thomas Kiernan who tried basically to do a Boys of Summer about the 1951 Giants. So in the chapter of the interview with Jim Hynd, he said that when Hynd won the first playoff game in 1951, he said Westrom led him through the game, and he didn't shake Westrom off once. But Westrom,
go ahead.
Westrom started to get hurt a couple of years later, and he only caught about half the games in 1954, and for the rest of his career. But the one who used to catch Wilhelm most of the time by then was Ray Cott,
right?
Who has a lot of pass ball records.
Yeah, he I guess it could be called Hoyt-Wilhelm disease. I remember Gus Triandos. Gus Triandos with the Orioles had a huge number of pass balls.
Yeah.
Then of course they got rid of Ray Cott. They sent him over to the Cardinals.
Yeah, with the Dark and Lockman trade. Yeah.
In that huge trade that Red Jints was in. The Giants and the Cardinals were my two favorite teams in that year. It was 1956. And I came out, my father hands me the sports page of the New York Times that morning. It was like June 15th. It was right at the trade deadline. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, there's a picture of these 8 guys who were switching teams. And the footnote, the personal footnote is, I always like to go see Stan Musial. So we had baseball tickets to go see the Giants and the Cardinals, I believe, shortly thereafter. And it was just weird as hell. You showed up at the Polo Grounds, and there's Al Dark in a Cardinals uniform and Shane Dean in a Giants uniform, and the two catchers, Sarney and Cott, had switched. Lockman was in a Cardinals uniform. It was just crazy. I mean, there weren't that many people on the field, and 8 of them looked like they were in the wrong uniform.
Well, it's funny. They got Lockman back for Wilhelm at the end of that. After the end of that season, and Dark played regularly mostly at third base for the Cardinals in 1957, and then early in 58 they made a trade I couldn't understand. They shipped Cardinals shipped Dark to the Cubs for Jim Brosnan, who at that time was didn't have his books out and nobody knew who he was.
Yeah.
And they brought Bobby Thompson back when Shanes was there for a year because they traded him the next year to the Braves. They brought back Bobby Thompson and Danny O'Connell, who couldn't hit, and a pitcher named Ray Crone. And what was very surprising was after 57, they unloaded Lockman, Mueller, and Thompson. So the only 2 players of note that they took to San Francisco from New York were Mays and Antonelli, because Bill White, who'd been there in 56, missed 57 because he was in the military, and came back in 58, was 1 year there, and then was traded for Sam Jones. They didn't want much of the New York Giants to be part of San Francisco Giants.
I remember Bill White one time saying that he got out of the Army a little bit early, and he called the Giants and says, "Hey, I'm back," and they didn't, according to what he said they didn't even know who he was. And at that time they had Cepeda ready to go.
Yeah.
So White said, I figured I was not going to be with the team that much longer, but it turned out really, I think, for a great move by Bill White, because the Cardinals installed him at first base, and he became an all-star at that position.
Giants got Giants got a couple of years out of Sam Jones.
Right.
Yeah, before he started to fade. Yeah. But
Jones
basically, and if you remember, in 1958, the Giants brought up a whole load of rookies. Davenport and Wagner and Felipe Alou and the catcher Bob Schmidt, Cepeda, of course, and probably a couple of others who I'm missing.
Ed Versu, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can probably remember this also, but the Giants games were reconstructed on WNGM, I think, or
Russ Kiter.
Russ Kiter.
Well, he broke the ruler on the table for a broken bat hit. And fans would say it was very windy out there. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I can remember thinking, who are these guys as the Giants? It seemed very, very, everything about it as a kid in Connecticut seemed very strange. They weren't in New York anymore. They were in San Francisco. The radio hookup sounded hokey, and all of the names were different. Jack Sanford, wasn't he a rookie that year also?
57 for the Phillies. They got him after 1958 for Ruben Gomez and Valmy Thomas.
That's right. That's right. In any case, we've got a few minutes left to talk a bit about Roy Campanella.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing about these recreations, because Ronald Reagan used to recreate for the Cubs way back when. And sometimes the tape would break. And when the tape broke, whoever was hitting knocked off 50 foul balls until they got it straightened out. But, Campy was born in Philadelphia in 1921. His father was white and his mother was black. And he started playing for money with the Baltimore Elite Giants in the Negro Leagues. He was 15. And 15 years old. He went there in 1936. And
he's still in high school, then I would guess, right?
Yeah. And when he signed the contract, Biz Mackey, who was I think the manager of the team, promised his mother that he would take good care of him. And Biz Mackey taught Campanella how to become a top-notch professional catcher. And when Ricky saw his accomplishments in the Negro Leagues, he signed Campanella. And Campanella and Don Newcomb played in 1946 out in Nashua, New Hampshire, in a Class B league. They were both promoted to Montreal for 1947. And what happened with Campanella is the Rocher thought he was ready to become a major league catcher, and he was screaming to Ricky to bring Campanella up because the 47 catcher, Bruce Edwards, came down with a sore arm and couldn't throw the ball more than 5 feet. And Ricky said no, and he used Campanella to break the color line in the Old American Association with St. Paul. And finally, halfway through the season, he consented to have Campanella come up to the Dodgers. And Campy made a difference, and he turned out to be a superb ball player, and he won 3 MVPs in 1951, 1953, and 1955, although a lot of people in 1955 felt the award should have gone to Duke Snider. But Campy also got hurt sometimes. He had a huge year in 1951, but pulled his hamstring right at the end of the season. And after the first playoff game at Ebbets Field, Dressen, the manager, decided that the foul territory in the Polo Grounds was too much for Campanella. So he benched him for Rube Walker in Game 2 and Game 3. In Game 2, they won 10-0. In Game 3, he never got to bat in Game 3. And there were people who felt that even a hobbled Campanella would have been able to get Newcomb through that game.
Yeah.
Because he has such Yeah, go ahead.
Why did he feel that the area of the Polo Grounds, because there was just so much foul territory?
Foul territory, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so for a pass ball or a foul ball or something, it was going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in 52 we had a decent year. Mediocre. 53 he rebounded and drove in 142 runs in that season, which was, I think, there's still a record for most ever by a catcher. And, that Dodger team won 105 games, and probably was the best team that the Brooklyn Dodgers ever put out there. And
which one? 53?
Yeah, and they won 105 games in the 285 and overwhelmed everybody in the National League. They won a pennant something like 14 games, and the Yankees beat them in the World Series. And
in 7 games, I think, right?
Yeah, 6 games.
Yeah.
In 54, he hurt his hand and batted .207. And along with Newcomb, who had been in the service, who came out and had a very mediocre year in 1954, that helped the Dodgers lose the pennant.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he was hurt.
I heard one story that a doctor had nicked a nerve in his hand.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which resulted in reduced ability to both throw and hit, I would assume.
Yeah. He batted .207.
Yeah.
And he bounced back to have a very good year in 1958, which was his last good season, and they won the World Series that year. In
56, I think.
55.
I think you mean.
No, 55.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, 56.
Okay.
He was hurt again, and played through the season with injuries and batted .219, and it really wasn't much help to them. At 57, the years of catching started to have its effect on him. He slowed down and hit .242. Really didn't contribute much in 57. And then, of course, in January of 1958, he had that terrible accident, which left him paralyzed for the rest of his life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he would have been, I think, he would have been a very good manager, assuming they were really that anybody would give him a job back then. But he lived for 35 years after the accident, and got to the point where he became cheerful, and got to the point where he couldn't really write. Somebody developed some device which enabled him to write his name, and he wound up doing several card shows. And of course, promoters were charging a ton of money, and people lined up around the block to get this. But he had a very, very mixed career, and when Bill James, a number of years ago, put out something for called a historical baseball abstract, and did the catchers, he had Campanella as number 1 at his peak, and Yogi Berra as number 1 in his career.
Yeah, and there is a difference. That's true.
Yeah, because I several years ago I got into a Facebook argument. I stopped doing that after this one, Berra versus Bench. I realized 2 days into it, most of these people never saw Berra play. And now Bench has been out 36 years, and a lot of people that are on that now never saw him play.
Yeah.
But I'd like to mention a couple of other catchers who were pretty good during that period, but not up to that level. Del Crandall was a long-time catcher of the Milwaukee Braves.
Sure.
Yeah, and Sherman Lala with the White Sox, and Sammy White with the Red Sox. And Jim Hegan was like Westrom. He hit .220 and was tremendous defensively.
You know what? Since we're talking about New York catchers, I'm going to close with a name from the very distant past, but I just came up with it. I've heard the name before, but does the name Bill Bergen mean anything to you?
Yes, it does. When I was first looking through the encyclopedia, the original encyclopedia came out in 1951. I got to him. I saw a fairly lengthy career, and then I looked at the batting averages.
Yep.
I think he had 130 one year, and he was I think he had something like a 170 lifetime average.
You got it right on the nose. 170, and it is the lowest batting average of anybody who played for any significant amount of time. But the funny thing is, Bill Bergen in his day was considered as fine a defensive catcher as anybody in the game, because people in the modern era think, how could somebody play for so long? I think Bergen played for 7-10 years or something. How could he played for Brooklyn in the first decade of the 20th century? How could somebody play so long with such a low batting average? Back then, catching was seen as almost exclusively a defensive position. And he handled pitchers. He had very, very well. He had a great percentage of throwing runners out, so that's how he stayed behind the plate. But you triggered this by saying that people have never seen people play. These days, guys like Bergen are completely lost to modern fans unless they've done a lot of reading about the game, which obviously you and I and Ralph have.
Yeah, when I got that encyclopedia, all I had basically for the hitters was games and average. Yeah.
Yes.
So I was looking through it, and I got it, and then all of a sudden, because his last name is Bergen, so it was easy to get to him alphabetically. I saw he'd play about 10 years and had these averages. So I immediately realized he must have been a tremendous defensive catcher and handler of pitchers to be able to stay in the major leagues for that long with that kind of an average.
Absolutely. On that note, on catching and defensive, I think we can wrap for the day. And as always, Alan, it's been a joy to talk to you. And I look forward to Ralph materializing again later in the week and giving us our assignment for next week. Until then, thank you. And Alan, I'll see you, so to speak, again next week.
Okay. Right? Is Ralph still there or no?
I think Ralph is
okay. He's the one
right now.
He's the one who started the recording, so he has to sign off.
A couple of times
he hasn't.
A couple of times it has just ended.
Yeah, it just ended, and then he sees we're off, and then he signs off. Okay, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The proceeding has been a comfortably zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.